I also just want to touch on you left the UNP, you joined the SJB. Now there's a lot of conversation in the media whether the SJB should rejoin the UNP and form a national government of sorts and support Ranil Wickramaratne, the president's reform process. What do you think of these rumors? Are you surprised that so many have subscribed to this view? Because I just want to point out that this national government inevitably creates a democratic deficit, because now already we know local governments are functioning without a mandate. The executive has taken its place without a real national mandate. Parliament, that is a failure, wants to add to this national government. So how are so many people looking at this national government thing as a possibility, given the obvious checks and balances that are going to go? I mean, you're basically talking about creating one government and giving the people no choice. Is that how you see it?
There is no question of us actually joining a national government. What we do understand that the country is in a difficult situation, but we also need to really have the basis to do that. So you had a legal president in Gotabaya Rajapaksa, but people didn't think he was very legitimate, so they got rid of him. We have a legal president in Ranil Wickramaratne, but it's questionable whether he is legitimate too. We have people like myself in parliament who are also legally there. The question that people are asking is it legitimate also? So this is the actual situation in the country, right? The question of legitimacy. Ranil Wickramaratne has come in as president, and he has tried to take certain steps, particularly on the economy, to stabilize the economy. And we are very clear. If the proper steps are taken in terms of stabilizing the economy or the future of this country, we will look at each proposal that comes. We will treat it on its merit. And where we have to oppose it, we'll oppose it. Where we can support it, we will support it. And the reason we will support it is not because we want to prop up any government which we think is not legitimate. The only reason we want to support it is because we cannot bear to see the suffering of ordinary people, right, on the street. We can't bear to see, right, when I drive in sometimes at 1 in the morning, even in the city of Colombo, and stop at a traffic light, right, there are women carrying children at 1 in the morning and coming and tapping on your car window. This was unthinkable, particularly for women to do this. You might always find some men doing it. If you travel basically along the beachfront, when you go from Angulana, Lunava, right, into Moratuwa on that beachfront, right, people are without employment, right? And we know hundreds and hundreds of thousands have lost their jobs at this time. They were the sole breadwinner in those families. Those families are suffering. They can't hardly afford a meal for a day, right? So we are very sensitive to that. That is why we are not supporting any government. If the proper measures are brought in, right, by the present government, they brought the anti-corruption law, we worked with the government, we moved 80-odd amendments to it, we got it passed. They brought the central bank independence law, we are in principle agreed on central bank independence, but we also said not just an independent central bank, an accountable central bank. And as a result, I had to personally, while the party walked out, I and Mr. Kiriella had to personally vote against it, only for that reason, that it was not accountable. And we had very strong views about accountability there, and that is why we voted against it. So there's no question of us joining the government. We will look at the issues that come, and if progressive measures are brought, we will support it. But I can tell you this, on the rule of law, on democracy, and on human rights, so far from what we have seen, we are opposing the government.
Since you mentioned the Central Bank Act, I noticed that you joined a rather eclectic group of 24 MPs that voted against the Central Bank Act. So I just want to include Akila from the JVP, Dr. Charika Herath, Dr. Harni Amarasuriya, your colleague Lakshman Kirialla, but also Udaya Gammampilla, Vasudev Nanakar, Mr. Vimal Veeravansa. So I think the question about the Central Bank Act is independence versus clipping the powers of the CBSL. Now, I think you briefly, can you touch on where are the dangers? Because I understand that there was a certain amount of fiscal dominance of the central bank, where the central bank became sort of a bulwark for the government's budget, and that obviously was a big problem. Now, in the future, Mr. Wickramaratne, are you worried that the central bank's powers are being unnecessarily reduced in a point where, okay, perhaps we would have more trust in the future central bank government, central bank governor and central bank team? Are we unnecessarily clipping their powers, is the question.
No, I don't think. I don't think. I think this bill gives them a fair independence. Our question was more about accountability.
All right.
And if you look at it, right, and what's the news at the moment? The news at the moment is that Hamilton Bank or whatever has gone to court, right? And the news at the moment is that they have acquired bills, bonds, right, from the central bank, must have been at a huge discount, basically maturing months away, right? And then they can fly in here, and the particular individual flies in, and there are, I don't know whether it's substantiated or unsubstantiated, met the central bank governor. I think we should actually look at the CCTV cameras of the central bank.
For the audience sake, there are pictures online that have
There are
circulated. They have
pictures
met.
online.
They have met. There is no
so-
question the former central bank governor met the
okay,
officials.
so if they have met, then obviously, and then probably given an assurance that they will be paid, obviously they are doing it for a very, very high return. Otherwise, they won't be even doing it. So we're talking about when the central banks are unfortunate, like there are bad politicians and good politicians. There are very good central bankers. But when you even get one or two people at the top who are doing the wrong thing, it unfortunately tarnishes the reputation of the institution, which we must all protect, the central bank's reputation. So this is the situation. So where we specifically, one of the issues that we had on this bill was, right, the monetary board is generally comprised of very capable, knowledgeable individuals, and independent members are taken. And there are 5 members on the monetary board. Our question was, why don't you leave it like that? Then they said, no, we want to expand it, right? Okay, if there is a logical reason to expand it, we need to understand what the logical reason is. Then when the act finally came out, they had a governing council for the central bank of about 7 people, and then they said that the monetary board will be subsumed with the governing council. So when the monetary board includes the governing council, so suddenly I think the number was like the monetary board went up to about 11 members. And we were like, what? 11 members? This is an issue for experts, monetary policy, right? It's an issue of accountability. It's an issue of confidentiality. You know about the bond scam that was shouted about, screamed about, right? That that primary dealers benefited, working hand in glove with politicians, and it's all to do with fixing of the rates. So the only way the rates can be fixed is when the monetary board meets, they take a decision before the markets open. If that information is conveyed to somebody in the market, they will benefit from it because they have inside information. Now that story needs to be investigated, not about just the Yahapalane government time.
Yes, yes.
That practice needs to be investigated going back in time. In fact, there was an audit that was done, and it's pointing fingers that that audit has also been tabled in Parliament, right? But no action has been taken, right? So, my question here is really, we are coming against that, and then you are saying we'll expand the monetary board. I said no way should the monetary board be expanded. We should actually lessen the monetary board, and the people sitting on the monetary board should take responsibility for monetary action. Then if they want to increase it by 1 or 2, I mean, we don't want to get too technical and too fussy.
Is it the Treasury Department within the Finance Ministry that is ultimately responsible for appointing members to the Monetary Board still under the new act? Because as long as there's a link between the Finance Ministry and the Treasury Sec and the Monetary Board, that's probably where these things go wrong.
Yeah, I'm just trying to recollect, but I think we have put some checks and balances
There should be, yes.
on the independent members through the amendments that we passed in
Right,
Parliament.
right.
But the numbers was an issue. And then when I spoke to the people concerned, including the State Minister, and I said, this is one area that you need to really reduce this number. And ultimately, just before the vote, they said something like, this has gone to the courts, and the courts have also given certain changes, and the courts in their changes stipulated that the quorum for the monetary board should be 7, and therefore that's why we can't change it. I said, what? It's 7 based on 11. So we'll use the same ratio. If it's 5, it will be 3. Or if it is 7 on the monetary board, then it will be 5 the quorum. I mean, that kind of logic, right? And then they said, no, the AG has said this. I said, the AG has said this? I told the Prime Minister straight away before the vote, I said, Prime Minister, if what I am being told is correct, I will suggest that you relook as to who your AG is, if it is correct, right? So they just bypassed it, and they wanted it passed in that particular way. And I think that is an amendment that a future government should seriously look at, the composition and the independence of the monetary board. We are for the independence of the central bank, but we want accountability.
In a TV interview on the 22nd of March last year, 2022, you reiterated the SJB and the total opposition's calls to commence urgent debt restructuring. So that was March 2022. Now, the Gotabaya administration ignored those calls. The finance ministry, initially headed by Mahinda Rajapaksa, late by Basil Rajapaksa, they ignored these calls for a further several months until things crashed in 2022. Now, recently it was reported that President Wickramaratne is meeting with, or has already met with Mr. Basil Rajapaksa to discuss the upcoming budget. Can you tell us, or any idea why the President is meeting with Mr. Basil Rajapaksa, given his failures and the fiscal suicide the country experienced during his time as Minister of Finance? Why is he being consulted on the future budget?
I can only laugh. Whether he actually consulted him on the budget, because I'm sure the president knows more than that, and he, then consult Mr. Basil Rajapaksa, who, as you said, right, it was during his period that this whole calamity was created, and why would they be consulted? Now that's a little worrying in this sense, because if you go the populistic route, right, and if the budget is going the populistic route for a bankrupt country who is still trying to resolve its debt restructuring, the signal is you're going to go populism again, because what Basil Rajapaksa and them know is, how do we carry people along, or how do we fool the people, if I put it another way, basically to win an election. So what was the kinds of things they did in the past? One thing they did in the past was, this came and said, we'll give 100,000 new jobs. Right? What has happened as a consequence of that, of the Rajapaksas in power? What has happened as a consequence? Sri Lanka has a public service of, when you put everybody together, about 16 million people. Right? And that is one Sri Lankan public servant to 17 Sri Lankan citizens. If you take India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, it's like 1 to 100 and 1 to 180. If you take Japan, it's one public servant to more than 300 in the population, and we are 1 to 17. These are the kinds of decisions that have been taken, right, in the past, right, creating a public service. You ask anyone who has had to deal with the state, with the municipality, whether it's in the Inland Revenue Department, whether it's in the customs, whether it's so many, or in their area it's some other utility office, they'll all have some about it, about either corruption or about efficiency. Right? So I think this populistic thing needs to stop. Jobs, full stop, in the public service. In fact, we just need to look at those who are there, and basically it's not their fault. It's not the fault of the public servant. It's the fault of politicians. They have ruined this country by actually doing this. What we should be doing is actually retraining them and making the door for better, productive, innovative journey in terms of their careers. That's the kind of thing that we should be looking at. So I can't see, how a budget consultation could have happened unless the newspapers or the media has wrongly reported it.